Chapter 1. When the sky gathered for council. In those times, when humanity had no telescopes yet, but already possessed anxiety, the night sky seemed not like a map, but like a living being. It breathed with the winds, changed its mood with the seasons, answered bold questions with lightning, and responded to the most important ones with silence. People lifted their heads not for beauty, but for survival. The stars suggested the time for sowing, the moon guided the tides, and the strange wandering lights that refused to stay still inspired a special kind of reverence. These would later be called planets. But first, they were gods. Mars crossed the sky like a warrior carrying a burning shield. Venus appeared in the morning and then again in the evening, like a beautiful deceiver promising love and disaster at once. Jupiter shone with calm authority, as if it knew more about human destinies than humans themselves dared to admit. Saturn moved slowly, almost old and patient, as though it was in no hurry because it had already seen how everything would end. And when several of these celestial wanderers suddenly appeared close together, ancient people understood it as a sign. Thus began the history of the great planetary parades. Of course, no one called it a parade then. There were no astronomical terms, no celestial mechanics, no calculations of orbits. There was fear. There was wonder. There was the feeling that the heavens were gathering for council without inviting humankind. In Babylon, priests climbed to the tops of ziggurats to read the writing of the sky. They recorded the movements of celestial bodies on clay tablets with such precision, as if the gods themselves might one day demand an account. They were not interested in the romance of stars. They were interested in power. If Mars approached Saturn, it could mean war. If Venus stood near Jupiter, it might signal a blessing for the king, or, on the contrary, a warning of rebellion. One of the earliest records of such a gathering of planets dates back to the 7th century BCE. Babylonian observers noticed an unusual convergence of several bright celestial bodies and connected it to the fate of Assyria. Historians still debate exactly what they saw, but what matters is this. Even then, humanity sensed that the arrangement of planets was not merely geometry, but a story, and everyone wanted to know what it was saying. In Egypt, the sky was not a book, but a river. The stars drifted through it together with the souls of dead pharaohs. There, too, unusual gatherings of planets were noticed, but interpreted differently, as confirmation that earthly order depended on celestial order. If harmony ruled in the heavens, then Maat, the law of balance, must rule on earth as well. And when that harmony seemed too perfect, people grew uneasy, because absolute order often comes just before great change. The Greeks approached it differently. They were the first to replace fear with the question, why? For them, planets were no longer only gods, but also problems to solve. Pythagoras saw in the heavens the music of the spheres, an ideal symphony where every planet moved according to its own note. Plato dreamed of a world arranged with mathematical beauty. Aristotle tried to explain everything through perfect circles, but even they could not resist the temptation of prophecy. When, in 7 BCE, Jupiter and Saturn aligned 3 times in the constellation of Pisces, the event was noticed not only by astronomers, but also by those searching for omens. Later, some researchers would suggest that this celestial event may have become the basis for the legend of the Star of Bethlehem. Not a comet, not a miracle in the usual sense, but a rare conjunction of planets. If that is true, then one of the most famous symbols in human history was not a flash, but a parade. Quiet, precise, inevitable. Planets do not shout, they simply arrive at the right place at the right time. The Romans, heirs of the Greeks and masters of turning philosophy into an instrument of state, used the sky almost officially. Emperors loved it when the stars confirmed their power. Augustus gladly accepted celestial signs in his favor. Court astrologers were no less important than generals. When rare planetary conjunctions occurred, they were declared evidence of divine order, an order in which Rome, naturally, occupied the central place. And if the alignment looked threatening, there was always a priest ready to explain that the danger was meant for the enemies of the empire. Thus, the heavens became part of politics. But it was not only the West that looked upward. In China, astronomy was a matter of state and almost sacred duty. The emperor was considered the mediator between heaven and earth, and therefore, any unusual movement of the planets was not a matter of philosophy, but of national security. Court astronomers could be executed for incorrectly interpreting a celestial event. Imagine a profession where a mistake in observing Jupiter could cost you your head. And yet, it was precisely because of this severity that Chinese chronicles preserved astonishingly accurate records of planetary conjunctions, eclipses, and comets. They understood, if heaven speaks, it must not only be heard, it must be written down. Because sometimes meaning reveals itself later. And indeed, centuries later, European scholars would compare their calculations with Chinese archives, like travelers consulting a map drawn by a long-dead master. In India, planets were not merely celestial bodies, but participants in a cosmic drama. Navagraha, the 9 celestial forces, influenced the destinies of people, kingdoms, and entire eras. Planetary alignments were seen as moments of particular tension when the very fabric of time became thinner. One could expect enlightenment, one could expect catastrophe, often both at once. Humanity still knew nothing of Kepler's laws, had no suspicion of Newton's gravity, and could not imagine that planets moved without any concern for us. But it was precisely this ignorance that made the sky intimate. People felt themselves to be participants in what was happening. Today, we know. A planetary parade is only a visual effect. The planets do not line up in a perfect straight line like soldiers on a parade ground. Navagraha. They simply happen to be on the same side of the sun or appear from Earth in nearby sections of the sky. Beautiful, yes, but not mystical. And yet, try telling that to someone standing in a desert 4,000 years ago, watching Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn burn together above the horizon. Try explaining to a shepherd that it is only perspective. Try convincing a king that the gods mean nothing by it. He will not believe you. And perhaps, in his own way, he will be right. Because meaning is not only physics, it is also perspective. A planetary parade never directly changed the course of history, but it changed the people who made decisions. And sometimes, that is enough for empires to collapse, wars to begin, or religions to be born. The sky did not command, it hinted, and humanity has always been remarkably talented at interpreting hints exactly the way it wanted. Thus began the great history of celestial parades, not as a scientific phenomenon, but as a mirror of the human soul. We looked at the planets and saw ourselves, our fears, our hopes, our longing for order in a world that never promised to be understandable. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 2, when fear received a formula. For nearly 2,000 years, humanity looked at planetary parades as if the sky were writing prophecies in fiery handwriting. Priests argued with kings, astrologers argued with one another, and every new meeting of Jupiter and Saturn seemed like the beginning of either a golden age or the end of the world. People wanted the universe to speak to them personally, and the planets willingly accepted this role, silent yet majestic companions. But one day, a man appeared who decided that the heavens could not only be feared, but also calculated. His name was Nicolaus Copernicus. He was not the first to doubt that Earth was the center of the universe. Before him, there had been guesses, philosophical hints, mathematical assumptions. But he was the one who did something dangerous. He turned doubt into a system. In 1543, almost at the threshold of his own death, Copernicus published his work On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. The title sounded almost calm, but the content was a revolution. He proposed an idea that sounded to many almost like an insult. Earth does not sit on the throne of creation. It moves. It is merely one of the planets revolving around the sun. For us, this is a school fact. For the 16th century, it was nearly heresy. If Earth is not in the center, then humanity is not in the center either. And if humanity is not in the center, then who is truly the main character in this story? That thought frightened people more than comets. In the new system, a planetary parade suddenly stopped being a ceremony revolving around humankind. It became a natural consequence of moving bodies that did not require our approval. The planets were not gathering for us, they were simply following their paths. It was both liberation and humiliation. The sky became more honest and colder. But Copernicus's ideas did not change the world immediately. Most people do not read revolutions on the day they are published. They need time to grow used to the thought that familiar reality may only be a comfortable mistake. The real blow to the old order was delivered by Johannes Kepler. If Copernicus moved Earth from the throne, Kepler dismantled the throne itself into mathematical details. He was a man of strange combination, a mystic with the mind of an accountant. He believed in divine harmony and at the same time could spend years checking tedious numerical tables until he found the truth. He inherited the observations of Tycho Brahe, the great astronomer who trusted his eyes more than beautiful theories. It was in those records that Kepler found what changed everything. Planets do not move in perfect circles. They move in ellipses. This seemed almost like an insult to aesthetics. The circle was the symbol of perfection, the favorite figure of philosophers and theologians. The ellipse looked suspiciously earthly, imperfect, as if the universe itself admitted that it was under no obligation to be beautiful by our standards. But truth rarely asks beauty for permission. Thus, Kepler's laws were born. Planets move in elliptical orbits. They move faster when they are closer to the sun. And there is a precise mathematical relationship between orbital period and distance from the star. For the first time, the celestial dance received not an interpretation, but a formula. A planetary parade was no longer a mysterious council of gods. It became a predictable result of celestial geometry. One could know in advance when Jupiter would meet Saturn. One could calculate when Venus would appear especially bright. One could take from fate its favorite weapon, surprise. For astrologers, this was almost a personal insult. For science, it was the birth of a new language. But even Kepler did not give the final answer to the main question. Why? Why do planets move exactly this way? Why do they not fly away into the black emptiness? Why does all of this stay together? The answer came with a man who, according to legend, once simply watched an apple fall. Legends, of course, love to simplify geniuses. Isaac Newton did not discover gravity because a fruit struck his head. He discovered it because he was one of those rare minds who cannot tolerate incomplete explanations. The very existence of unanswered questions irritated him. If the moon does not fall to Earth, why? If planets do not leave their orbits, why? Why? If an apple falls downward and not sideways, why? Why? In 1680 Hina, Newton published Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, a book after which the universe became mechanics. It turned out that the same force that makes an apple fall to the ground keeps the moon near Earth and the planets near the sun. Gravity, not the whim of gods, not a secret conspiracy of the heavens, not a symbol, a force, precise, measurable, mercilessly indifferent. It was one of the greatest moments in the history of human thought. Heaven and earth obeyed the same law for the first time. Before, it seemed that the rules of gods worked above, while the rules of humans worked below. Newton destroyed that boundary. The universe turned out to be a single mechanism, and if one knew how it worked, one could predict the future. Almost frightening power. After Newton, planetary parades stopped being prophecies in the strict sense of the word. They could be calculated centuries in advance. Fear did not disappear completely. People rarely abandon their favorite superstitions willingly, but fear now had competition. Knowledge. Now an astronomer could tell a king, in 40 years, a great conjunction will occur. And that was no longer magic. It was mathematics. Although, to be honest, good mathematics always looks a little like magic, especially to those who do not understand it. The 18th century greeted the sky differently. Observatories rose like cathedrals of a new religion. Telescopes became longer, lenses more precise, and astronomers less and less tolerant of mystical explanations. Planets were no longer characters in a cosmic drama. They became objects, gas giants, rocky worlds, bodies with mass, velocity, and orbital inclination. Romance gave way to precision. But human beings are strange creatures. Even when they understand the mechanism, they still search for meaning within it. When, in 1774, a notable conjunction of several bright planets occurred, newspapers across Europe still wrote about omens. Some saw it as a sign of revolutions, some as evidence of divine judgment, and some simply as a good excuse to sell more newspapers. Science explained, imagination resisted, and probably always will, because for human beings, it is not enough to know how the world works. They need to know why. The planetary parade lost its mystical monopoly, but it did not lose its power over imagination. It simply changed its mask. Instead of prophecy, it became proof of order. Instead of warning, it became a reminder that chaos is not absolute. There is rhythm. There is law. There is repetition. And if Jupiter meets Saturn again after decades, then there is something in the universe more reliable than human promises. That was comforting, especially in times of war, especially during revolutions, especially when history itself seemed like a broken mechanism. People continued looking upward, not because they lacked answers, but because answers did not cancel wonder. On the contrary, sometimes understanding makes the miracle even deeper. The realization that billions of tons of rock and gas move according to invisible laws with such precision that we can predict their meetings centuries in advance, is that truly less astonishing than an ancient prophecy? Perhaps even more so, because the miracle did not disappear. It simply changed its language, and humanity, at last, began to learn how to read it. It simply changed its language, and humanity, at last, began to learn how to read it. Chapter 3: The Age of Telescopes and the End of Innocence. There is a moment every person experiences, even if they have never held a telescope in their hands. The moment when you suddenly realize the world is far bigger than is comfortable for you. It is an unpleasant discovery. At first, it feels almost like a personal insult. You lived as if you were standing at the center of the story, as if everything was happening around you, for you, with your participation. And then you lift your head to the sky and understand the universe did not even notice your existence. This is exactly what humanity experienced in the age of telescopes. When people learned to calculate the movement of planets, it seemed that the greatest mystery had been solved. The sky stopped being a theater of capricious gods and began to resemble a vast mechanism, precise, strict, almost flawless. It seemed that with just a little more effort, the entire universe could be explained down to its final gear, like an old clock patiently taken apart on a craftsman's table. But that was exactly when true wonder began, because it is one thing to know where a planet is, and something entirely different to see it for the first time. Before the telescope, astronomy was the art of waiting. A person stood beneath the open sky, freezing, measuring angles, recording the positions of celestial bodies, and hoping the clouds would show mercy. It was almost a monastic occupation, patience instead of prayer, stars instead of icons. Planets remained bright points, beautiful, mysterious, but faceless. Everyone spoke of Mars. No one knew Mars. In 1609, Galileo Galilei pointed toward the sky, an instrument that changed not only science, but human pride itself. The telescope was not his invention. Such tubes already existed in Holland, and at first, they interested people for very earthly reasons. It was convenient to observe an enemy from a safe distance. But Galileo did what always separates a true thinker from merely an intelligent person. He turned the instrument toward the place people are most afraid to look seriously, upward. And perhaps that is always the hardest part, not seeing, but daring to look. What opened before him destroyed the old world not loudly, but quietly, and that is usually how real truth arrives. The moon turned out not to be a perfect smooth sphere, as philosophers had taught, but a body with mountains, shadows, cracks, and scars, almost earthly. Spots were discovered on the sun. A nearly blasphemous thought, since perfection was not supposed to have flaws. But the greatest shock came with Jupiter. Beside it, Galileo saw 4 small shining points. At first, he thought they were random stars, but they moved, night after night, as if they were bound to the planet itself. Thus, humanity saw for the first time the moons of another world. This was not merely a discovery, it was humiliation. A beautiful, necessary humiliation of human ego. It turned out that not everything revolves around us. Jupiter had its own small system, its own order, its own celestial family, and all of it existed without any permission from Earth. For the old world, this sounded almost indecent. For the new one, it was the sentence passed upon geocentrism. Sometimes one small point in the sky destroys an entire civilization of beliefs. When Galileo wrote about his observations, he was arguing not only with scientists, he was arguing with humanity's 1,000-year habit of believing itself to be the center. And people rarely forgive those who take away their leading role, especially if they do it with a smile. Galileo was too confident, too witty, too unafraid of authority. Truth irritates less than the person who speaks it without proper respect for someone else's self-deception. The church could tolerate complicated ideas. Mockery, far less. Thus began the conflict that would later be simplified into a beautiful schoolbook scheme. Science against religion, light against darkness. But reality is always more complicated than textbooks. Many churchmen understood astronomy perfectly well. The problem was not only in the facts. The very architecture of the world was changing. If Earth is not the center, then humanity is not either. And that is no longer a scientific argument. It is an existential catastrophe. Galileo lost the trial, but he won time. Chapter 3, sometimes that is enough to remain right forever. After him, the telescope ceased to be a toy of curiosity and became an instrument of humility. Astronomers across Europe began to look at the sky differently. They no longer asked, "What do the planets mean?" They asked, "What are they?" And that question turned out to be far more dangerous. In 1781, William Herschel discovered Uranus. Today, it sounds like a line from a textbook. Back then, it was a philosophical scandal. Since ancient times, humanity had known 7 planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the Sun, and the Moon. 7 was a beautiful number, almost sacred. 7 days of the week, 7 notes, 7 heavens. The world loved completeness. People, in general, love finished lists. They create the illusion of control. And suddenly, it turned out the list was not finished. Beyond Saturn, there was something else. The universe did not ask permission from symbols. It simply turned out to be larger. And honestly, this is one of the most truthful stories in the history of science. Again and again, we build a neat picture of the world, and reality arrives and calmly says, "No, not yet." It is irritating, but that is exactly why science is alive. The discovery of Uranus changed not only astronomy, but the psychology of the age. If a new planet could be found, then the map of the world was still incomplete. That meant the unknown had not been left in the past. It meant there was still more ahead to be amazed by. That inspired people and frightened them. Because infinity is beautiful only from a distance. When it comes too close, it becomes cold. Then came Neptune. First as suspicion, then as proof. Scientists noticed that Uranus behaved strangely, as if something invisible were pulling it along its orbit. It was almost a detective story. No one could see the criminal, but the traces were too obvious, and the calculations were right. In 1846, Neptune was found almost exactly where mathematics had predicted it would be. It was a triumph of reason. We learned to find the invisible by its influence, almost like in love or in pain. The most important things are rarely seen directly, but their presence changes everything around them. Against this background, planetary parades also changed their meaning. Now they were no longer just beautiful convergences of familiar lights. Every planet acquired character, history, temperature, atmosphere, moons, and its own silence. Mars stopped being merely a red dot and became a world where people were already imagining canals and alien civilizations. Saturn no longer looked like an old man from myths. It became the owner of rings, so beautiful that even dry scientists sometimes forgot to speak dryly. Jupiter became a giant with storms larger than Earth itself. The sky gained depth. A planetary parade stopped being a flat line of light. It became a meeting of worlds. And that is an entirely different level of loneliness, and an entirely different level of awe. When newspapers in the 19th century wrote about great planetary conjunctions, people read them differently. These were no longer reports of omens, but news about neighbors in space, although, of course, the old habit did not disappear. It never does. When in 1910, Earth passed through the tail of Halley's Comet, millions of people seriously expected the end of the world. Newspapers sold anti-comet pills, charlatans became rich faster than astronomers, and scientists wearily explained that humanity would not die from cosmic gas. Panic always spreads faster than knowledge. That is a law not only of astronomy, but the telescope did the most important thing. It took away from the unknown its monopoly on fear. When you can see an object, it becomes less like a monster. It becomes a question, and questions can be explored. They can be argued with. Mistakes can be made around them. One can return to them. The telescope did not destroy mystery. It made it more honest. We stopped looking at planets as gods, but they did not become mere stones either. Too enormous, too beautiful, too indifferent to our small tragedies. And perhaps it is exactly that indifference that makes them so important. They do not exist for us. And therefore, by looking at them, humanity learns true humility for the first time. It is a difficult lesson, but a necessary one. In the age of telescopes, the planetary parade stopped being a warning. It became an invitation. Do not be afraid. Look closer. The universe never promised to be comfortable, but it is astonishingly generous to those who continue asking questions anyway. Chapter 4. The Future Parade and Our Final Gaze. Every generation of people, for some reason, sincerely believes that it is living in a special time. It is an amusing human weakness. We like to think that it is we who have been given the main stage of history, that right now The world is especially fragile, especially important, especially close to catastrophe or miracle. Our ancestors waited for the end of the world in exactly the same way, searched for signs in the sky in exactly the same way, believed that their own era would be the last or the greatest. And perhaps there is something touching in that. It is difficult for a person to live if their life feels too small. So we are constantly trying to place ourselves inside something enormous. An empire, a religion, love, history, and of course, the cosmos. A planetary parade has always been exactly that for us, a chance to feel that the sky also participates in our fate, that the universe is not indifferent, that it sometimes looks back. Today, we know more than all the priests of Babylon, the philosophers of Greece, and the astrologers of imperial courts put together. We can calculate orbits thousands of years ahead. We send spacecraft to Mars, photograph the rings of Saturn, hear Jupiter's radio whispers, and see exoplanets near distant stars. We no longer ask the sky for permission. We ask it technical questions. And yet, something has remained the same. When in the evening a person steps onto a balcony, into a field, onto the roof of a house, or simply stops in the middle of a noisy city and lifts their head upward, they still feel the same thing a shepherd felt 4,000 years ago. A mixture of trevogi and wonder. A very ancient feeling, a very honest one. Because the cosmos is still larger than us. And probably that is a good thing. In the 21st century, interest in planetary parades has once again become widespread. The internet loves rare phenomena, especially those that can be beautifully photographed and instantly turned into sensation. Headlines shout about the great alignment, about the celestial event of the century, about the rarest chance to see fate with your own eyes. Part of this is, of course, journalism. Part of it is the eternal human hope that the sky still wants to say something. When in 2022, 2024, and the following years, several bright planets lined up together in the morning or evening sky, millions of people looked upward again. Some for a beautiful photograph, some from scientific curiosity, some because deep inside they still wanted a sign. And I am not sure that is naivete. Perhaps it is simply an old form of hope. We know that a planetary parade does not predict wars, does not cause earthquakes, does not open portals of destiny. But when you see Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn almost together, it is difficult to get rid of the feeling that the world has, for 1 second, become more collected. As if chaos paused, as if even the universe sometimes loves order. Maybe that is exactly what comforts us, not mystical meaning, but the very geometry of harmony, the realization that within endless movement, repetition exists, that even in the vast cold system, there is rhythm, and rhythm always comforts. The heart beats in rhythm, the sea returns in rhythm, the planets return in rhythm, and for some reason, humanity believes if something repeats long enough, then there must be hope in it. But the true future of planetary parades is connected not with observation, but with travel. We are living for the first time in an era when the question is no longer, what do the planets mean, but when will we go there? That is an entirely different level of audacity. Our ancestors asked Mars for protection. We are making plans for colonization. They saw Jupiter as a deity. We discuss its moons as possible bases for future expeditions. Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, names that once sounded like mythology now sound like stops on an itinerary. That is astonishing and a little frightening, because every step forward brings the universe closer, but at the same time takes away part of its romance. Once, the moon was a goddess, then a celestial body, Then, a landing site. What comes next? An address in a travel catalog? Humanity deals strangely with miracles. First, we worship them. Then, we explain them. Then, we build parking lots next to them. But perhaps that is what growing up is. We do not destroy mystery. We simply learn how to live beside it. And yet, there is one planetary parade that none of us will ever witness. The last one. In billions of years, the sun will begin to die. It will swell into a red giant, swallow the inner planets, or burn them beyond recognition. Orbits will change. Familiar order will collapse. Mercury will disappear. Venus, most likely too. The fate of Earth remains a subject of scientific debate, but in any case, it will no longer be a home. It will be the ashes of an address. Jupiter and Saturn will remain farther away, colder, more silent. The final planetary parade will not be a celebration, but a farewell, without spectators, without astrologers, without poets, without us. And there is a strange beauty in that. The universe does not need witnesses. It continues its movement even when there is no one left to watch. Perhaps that is the most mature thought astronomy leads us to. We are not the center. We are not the goal. We are not even a necessary condition. We are a brief glance of the universe at itself, a moment of consciousness among billions of years of silence. And that is exactly why our existence is so precious. Not because we are great, but because we are temporary. We look at a planetary parade, and in truth, it is not the planets arranging themselves before us. It is time arranging itself. The past, in which people feared the heavens. The present, in which we study them. The future, in which perhaps we will live among them. And farther still, the silence where no one will remain to call it beautiful, except, perhaps, the universe itself, if it even needs our word. I think the true meaning of a planetary parade was never in mysticism, and not even in science, but in reminder. Look up. You are smaller than you think, but far more important than you fear, because it is you who can see order within chaos. Name a star, ask a question, feel wonder, and therefore be truly alive. The planets do not come for us, but as long as we are still capable of looking at them with amazement, we still deserve our place beneath this vast, cold, and infinitely beautiful sky. Look, I try it.